Hello and welcome to the Minds on the Frontline podcast, brought to you by the Wayne State University Frontline Strong Together 5 program. I'm Geoff Lassers, one of the hosts of the Minds on the Frontline podcast, and I've been a professional firefighter, paramedic, educator, and content creator for about 19 years. Minds on the Frontline is co-hosted by Mike Mattern, who is also a professional firefighter and paramedic with 17 years experience. In addition, Mike is a peer support team member for his department and the Frontline Strong Together 5 program, as well as the chair of the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union, Behavioral Health Committee, and a board member of the Michigan Crisis Response Association. Bottom line, Mike has thorough training and experience with frontline mental and behavioral health. On the other hand, I do not. My role is to produce the show, whereas Mike is a resident subject matter expert. Together we hope to inform, educate, and entertain first responders, their families, and the public regarding the realities of frontline work-related mental health challenges. In this episode, we welcome back Dr. Ali Amisadri and Manisha Leary. Dr. Ali Amisadri, or Dr. A, is the Associate Department Chair of Psychiatry and Behavioral Neurosciences Services at Wayne State University School of Medicine, located in Detroit, Michigan. Manisha Leary is a trained psychotherapist with a focus on trauma. Manisha is also the manager of the Frontline Strong Together 5 program, or FST5. Dr. A and Manisha have a depth of experience in the world of mental and behavioral health, and that's why they're here. In today's episode, we talk about a very heavy topic, suicide in the frontline community. Specifically, we discuss suicidal thoughts and ideation. We also talk about what to look for if you think someone you know or work with may be suicidal, as well as how to approach that person and have the hard conversation. This turned out to be a very real, honest, and raw episode that we hope makes an impact. Too many frontline workers have committed suicide, and it's time to make a change. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Good morning, Michael. How are you, sir?
Good. What's going on, bro?
Hey, nice to have you. Too bad we couldn't do this intro person to person, but hey, Zoom's got to work sometimes, you know?
Hey, it is what it is, man. It's all good.
All right, buddy. Well, to kick things off, I want you to help us set the tone for today's episode. You know, I have zero training when it comes to any type of peer support, psychology, therapy. All those things are very, very, very foreign to me. I am a complete white belt when it comes to understanding those as I embark on this journey with you about learning it more. So my role on the Minds on the Frontline podcast is literally producing, recording, editing, getting it out there. I'm teamed up with you because you are our local subject matter expert as a peer supporter. Give everyone an overview of what we're going to talk about today.
What we're going to talk about today really is about suicide prevention and intervention. We're going to take you through the steps today of what to look for. I've gone out, our team has gone out, Manisha's gone out post-suicide to a lot of places, and we've heard the same things over and over again. One of the biggest things that we've heard is, I didn't know what to look for. What did I miss? We're going to kind of talk about those things to look for before the person is suicidal. Then what we're also going to do, you see the person suicidal, how to have that conversation with them. And when you have the conversation with them, what are some of the things that you want to say and things that you don't want to say to help get the help that they need and get them safe to where they no longer are going to be harming themselves, killing themselves, or completing suicide. Now, when I say this, it comes from a lot of different places. Manisha obviously has gone through extensive training as a clinician to help take care of these situations. Myself and our team members on the peer support team have gone through trainings. And one of the things that we currently do is we actually go out and teach what we're going to talk about today in a class called Suicide Writ Training. It's a class for first responders by first responders to teach how to have these conversations, what to look for in these situations. And that's really what we're going to bring to you today. Now, one of the biggest things with it today is, and we're going to give you a heads up, is this is going to be kind of an intense episode. This is going to be one of those episodes, it's really going to dig deep into the suicide world. And just as a heads up, when you start listening to it, it's going to be intense. And it's going to be one of those episodes that may hit something that you don't necessarily want to talk about or you don't want to hear. I'm just giving you a heads up ahead of time, but it's important to have this conversation and get this information out so you can start looking for these things in other people. And if the situation arises, you know what to say, how to say it, and also where to turn to get this person help.
Well, thank you very much for that overview, Mike. That is a very good look into what we're going to talk about today. But this is a two-part episode, and it's going to be led off with our discussion with Dr. Ali Amisadri. His academic background is going to allow us a little bit more clinical look at suicide, especially in the frontline first responder community. With no further ado, let's get right into it. Dr. Ali Amisadri. Dr. A, unfortunately, suicide is something that is experienced in our communities and tends to be a growing problem in the first responder communities. Before we begin our discussion, we're going to lean on you for more of an academic look at this and help us understand what those signs and symptoms of suicidal ideation look like to help us set the table for today's conversation.
Thank you for asking this important question. Before I answer it, I have to mention one thing, and that is the history of the stigma which is attached to suicidal thoughts and suicide in general goes back thousands of years. And you can see what a barrier it has created for people to acknowledge or try to communicate this to others. The other part is because of the nature of the work that you guys do, who are rescuers, who are going to take care of problems and issues, quote unquote, you cannot have problems. You should not have problems. When in reality, you guys witness the worst of humanity at all times. Collectively and singularly, they can create so much stress and despair inside one individual, which at times will be too overwhelming and the person cannot tolerate them anymore. So these were the two parts which I wanted to mention. However, what we need to understand also is that suicidal thoughts in general come and go, and they don't stick around. There are times that they may stick around, but most of the time they are temporary. And what we need to do is to encourage people to articulate and talk about it, because when you articulate those issues, in a way, you are putting them in places in your mind that they will be categorized, that you will give yourself some time to reflect on what you said. Because if they stay in your head and you do not talk about it, they will get enlarged and more troublesome. So when you talk about it and communicate it to others, that will be of great assistance to you to put them in the shelves that you are creating in your mind. So if I have a suicidal thoughts, it just doesn't stay as a suicidal thought. It will go to other places in my life because it is very stressful to have this. So what happens is that my stress hormones are going to be up, all of them. And when these stress hormones go up, because they want to make me ready to fight or flight or freeze. So what happens? At the end of the day, I will be drained because I was not able to fight and I was not able to run away. I had a task to do. I had to do my job, or I have to take care of my kids or my family. So there was no way around it but keeping inside. If I don't open up, then it's going to create problems for me. The other part is that as I go through these episodic, repeatedly, of course, episodic thoughts, and with these hormones, because of the stress, my sleep is going to be interrupted, or I won't be able to sleep. Because what happens in these negative thoughts of suicide, the stress hormone will make me more alert because I have to be watchful, I have to be careful. At the same time, I have to use the energy which is being created inside me. And if I can't express it and I can't deal with it, which I usually can't, if I don't go the best or the most healing way, which we usually forget to do, it will exacerbate and increase these thoughts. So what are the signs? There are behavioral signs. For example, if I'm someone who's social and then become isolative, probably there is something that others who care about me need to discover. On the other hand, if I'm someone who usually doesn't want to have interactions with others, and now is becoming very interactive all of a sudden, and goes drinking and watches a game and do other things very socially, which is out of character, that may be a sign that the person, because of those suicidal thoughts, have made up his or her mind that I'm going to do it, so for the next few days or few weeks of my life, let me just be free. From another aspect, we may see people who get into drinking or drugging or gambling and being reckless and driving fast or doing whole other things which is out of character for them or is being exaggerated to some degree. That's something that we need to be wondering and seeing why. Don't feel like, oh, he was depressed and now is not, and we are all relieved. That's the time that we need to be concerned, in fact. The issue of suicidal thought is a very complicated one, a psychological one, a social one, and a biological one. So there are different ways that we need to look into this segment of our life. Suicidal thought is very common in people. And as we know, we all go through, for example, losses in our lives. We also go through troubling times. For first responders, you guys go through so much that another individual cannot imagine. Throughout my career, I have seen first responders who, in 1 week, go through things that most people don't go through all their lives. So the trauma will get piled up on the top of each other, and at some point, it will come to a breaking point. At that time, maybe the individual thinks life is not worth living anymore because they have seen so much. They even feel guilty that they are living. And these are some of the issues that comes. For example, you may see or think that you have it easy because all these people that you see, they're killing themselves or killing someone else or getting into fights or multiple miseries that you witness in your career will lead you to believe that this is what it is and feel helpless. Helplessness is one of the major things that we need to understand and discover. Loss of control is the other one, for example. And for men particularly is when a relationship is not working. And divorce is one of those high areas that I'm always very concerned about, that men may kill themselves. Realizing that suicide or suicidal thought majorly is temporary and will go away. But at the same time, they have a tendency to come back. So seeking help in this regard is going to be extremely important. Showing that, oh, I can deal with it, or at the same time feeling ashamed that you have these thoughts or feeling guilty about it, etc., are things that we need to remove from the package of stigma which surrounds many professionals like yours. And hopefully we do something positive about it. What we are trying to do with FST5 is to open the door for people that they can discuss in an anonymous way, to ask for help. Nothing is going to be recorded. Nothing is to be personal for them. And we try to help the individual to be able to dissect what goes on and why, and provide the best care that we can do under circumstances to assist the first responder.
As always, sir, you nailed it. We appreciate that introduction to that, and then we could take it from here. I know you have patients to see and save.
Thank you.
Morning, guys.
Morning, how are you?
Morning.
Here we are again.
We're back for another month.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to be back. You guys have been rocking it out.
We are excited to have you back.
Yeah, you can go back as much as you want. You know, you kind of process our payment, so that's cool.
So
Got it. I'll use that over you whenever I want to come back.
That's fine. So remind everybody who you are, what you do, and where you do it.
I am Manisha Leary. I am the program manager for Frontline Strong Together. I'm the person who heads up the team with Wayne State.
So, Manisha, can you walk us through some of the statistics as we're unfortunately finding out the rate of suicide in the frontline community keeps going up? Can you kind of talk about statistics of suicide in the United States right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start off with giving you guys a definition, a clinical definition of suicidal ideations, which people say, oh, suicidal ideations are just thoughts. So suicidal ideations are thoughts attached with a plan. If you're sitting around thinking about committing suicide or attempting to, and then you also have a plan. So that makes it a little bit different than just thinking about the thoughts, because as Dr. Amisadri mentioned, a lot of people will have thoughts about what would it be if I'm not here? You know, if things were different. What would my life look like? Who would my wife would have married if I wasn't here in this space? And that's different, right? That can just be wondering. That can technically be called a suicidal thought. But an ideation is when you actually have a plan and you've thought about it enough specifically about your own self and in your life.
Oh, so the big difference there is having enough sadness, anger, whatever those emotions are that are leading you to the thought of me not being here might be better. And then there's the plotting, planning, get the tools out, get the right things they don't need, select a date and time. And that's when it's really suicidal ideation. That's interesting because I've never really compared and contrasted those spectrum of emotions in the past.
Yeah. So in the United States, the CDC says that law enforcement firefighters and EMS specifically have 1.4 times higher to die of suicide than in the line of duty. Because of the accumulative stress that happens on the day-to-day with your jobs and the occupational stress that comes with that, it easily bleeds into your personal life. So the two, as we mentioned before, are hard to separate. What will happen is that you'll have these thoughts, you'll get these triggers, and once the triggers start to hit you, you start to feel very in this space by yourself. Other people are not feeling it. You go to your jobs and you're realizing like the rest of the crew's not feeling it. You know, the rest of the department's not. They're doing good with this. They weren't triggered by this incident at all. They weren't triggered by anything at all. And then you start to feel like these are thoughts and feelings that only you have, which then in turns to the space of what if life was different without me being here? Would it be better for other people for it not to be here? The CDC also says that dispatchers, 911 dispatchers in that telecommunications space suffer from depression and anxiety 22% higher than any of the other 5 disciplines. You're hearing this happening, you're hearing this trauma happen, you have to go on to the next call, but you're imagining everything that's happening because that's what as humans, what our brains do. We have to put a visual to what we're hearing.
I guess
or what
you
we're
might
feeling.
even be on the next call and still thinking about.
Still be thinking about that.
Right.
Yeah. And so on a global scale, the World Health Organization says that there are 3,000 deaths every day from suicide. There are 1 suicide attempt every 3 seconds. More people die from suicide than from armed conflict. So firearms, being shot, being in a motor vehicle, being in a car, airplane accident, any of those things. So globally, this is somewhat of, I don't want to say a pandemic, but it gives us the numbers of a pandemic globally of how suicidal ideations are quickly leading to attempts, which quickly leads to death by suicide.
So, Mike, you actually spent a lot of time teaching this stuff and talking about this topic. And you actually have a class for suicide rapid intervention teams, or suicide RIT. And the whole point of today is really talking about those signs, those symptoms, but really there's some more databases and information that we can also glean first before getting really in the meat and potatoes of this. So tell me about where you got your numbers, and then tell me your numbers.
So one of the biggest things that people have to realize, even with the CDC, the World Health Organization, or wherever you may go, when it comes to suicides with first responders, there's no real reporting place to do that. There's no national reporting. And like Manisha said, 1.04%, I believe, you're more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty. The scary part about that is all the experts have come together and they think only about 40% have been reported. So at 40%, we are still beating line of duty deaths with suicides. One of the things that you can go to now, Geoff Dill, part of the Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance at ffbha.org, what he's done is he goes in and tries to do that. He tries to go in and the suicides that are reported, he goes in, kind of investigates it and see if it is. And his database is what we're using right now is what we feel is the most accurate numbers. He goes in, talks to the people, sees if it's first responder suicide, and then it's reported that way. Last year in Michigan, we had 43 suicides. Out of the firefighting numbers, because that's where I'm coming from, we had the most suicides by firefighters last year in the state of Michigan. So the numbers are there. The numbers are showing that this is a problem. This is what we need to do. And one of the biggest things, nobody wants to talk about it. It's the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about because it's that uncomfortable conversation that nobody wants to have. Most of us know people personally who have either attempted or completed, and everybody kind of has a personal and professional hook into this, but no one wants to talk about it. They're afraid to talk about it. That's where a lot of this stuff comes from, is nobody wants to talk about it. After somebody completes suicide, they don't want to have that conversation because the stigma that's attached to it, like Dr. A was talking about, there's a huge stigma that's attached. You'll see the sudden passing of such and such. When we start making it okay to talk about, and that's what we're really going to do here with the podcast and through Frontline Strong. When you make it okay to talk about, there's not the stigma that's attached to it. And the more we talk about it, the more we make it okay to go look at those individuals and say, hey, I'm seeing these things that's going on with you. Because when they feel like somebody gives a rip about them, that's when you save that person, or at least you attempt to. With this podcast and what we're going to do today and what we're going to talk about today, hopefully by the end of this episode, you're going to feel a little more comfortable going up to that person saying, hey, I'm seeing these things. I'm noticing this. Or you start looking at situations, because a lot of times after a suicide in a department, one of the biggest things you'll hear from anybody, I wish I would have saw something.
Yeah.
What did I miss? What did I miss? How could I have done something different? And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of times where you may not see anything. They may have hit it very well. But there's also different things that we can talk about that we can look at and go, okay, we got some red flags we're throwing up here. One of the surveys the IAFF did a couple years ago, what they did was they really wanted to look at the suicide numbers. They saw that the numbers were going up, and what they did was they did an anonymous survey of 1,000 active and retired firefighters. And what they found was absolutely shocking. Out of those 1,000 active retired firefighters, 50%, let that sink in, 50% said that they had thoughts of suicide. Of those 50%, 16% had actually attempted suicide, which is, for the general public, is somewhere between 2 and 9%. Mm-hmm. And we were at 16%.
And that's just our firefighter,
That's
firefighters.
just firefighters, active
Right.
retired firefighters.
Like you're just quoting there, the International Association of Firefighters represents all of the professional fire services within North America. So that's just them. There's 4 other on the front
Yes.
line that I'm almost afraid to find out what their rates are.
I would venture to say they're pretty comparable to that. But the biggest thing that they found, which was scary, they asked people, why didn't you go seek help? 92% of those 1,000 firefighters said the reason they didn't go get help was the stigma that was attached to mental health and suicide. 92%. Let's face it, that's on us. That's something we have to change. Once we change that stigma, that's what's going to help change these numbers.
You know, sometimes the stigma is accidental. It really is, because how many times, like, do you want to not be called the guy associated with that thing? Like, I know a guy who was late to work for his very first day of his job, and to this day, we're talking 20 years ago, they call him TikTok.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Wow.
no, it's,
So, but he
Yeah.
takes it well, right?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
laughs, but imagine if you don't.
Yeah.
And you don't realize you're creating this. So now you're TikTok. Hey, TikTok, you're going to go ask for help? That's a
Yep.
big ask, right? But so let's get back to your point there, is that unfortunately, some of the things that we love about our job, which is the ribbing, the fun,
absolutely.
sometimes we got to check in and be like, hey, man, you're not really taking that,
Yes. Yes.
too deep, are you?
Well, we're very good at having the conversations about what we want to talk about.
Right.
At the firehouse, you name it, we talk about
You
it.
got it.
I'm
Safe
not,
space.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get into the details.
No,
but
you don't need to.
You get to know a lot more about people than you want to know.
Sure.
But that's where it ends. It's not the substance of getting to know the person.
It's selective.
Yes.
They're sharing what they want to share.
We only take it to a certain point, and at that certain point, that's where I draw the line. When they're about to get to something that I don't really want to talk about, that's when we back off. And this is one of those subjects that a lot of people get scared. Am I going to say something wrong? Am I going to push that person to that? It's easier just to avoid it and go, I'm not going to talk to him about it.
Sure.
Someone else can talk to him about it.
Or create humor around it.
Yes.
Make it something lighthearted where you're like, hey, it's not as heavy as you think it is.
Yes, absolutely.
You've really highlighted that this growing problem of suicide really isn't going anywhere in the last couple of years, when the trajectory of it continues to rise. So we need to step in and do something. And by we, it's all of us. It's the team effort. It's the family. And that extends to all of our Frontline 5 and their families, literal and figurative. So to do that, we need to be aware of what things look like, because as we said, the people that need to ask for help won't. There's still an opportunity to help them and get them to an optimized wellness situation. From your experience in training on these types of things and being a peer support leader and talking about this subject all the time, from your perspective, help us understand the signs and symptoms of suicidal thoughts and ideation. And again, suicidal thoughts is just thinking about not being around, whereas ideation is literally coming up with a plan.
I think you have to understand how we get there. One of the biggest things with suicide is the sooner that you can get that intervention, the better. To find those little breadcrumbs that people are going to leave behind, hopefully that's what's really going to tip you off before you get to that point. One of the first things you want to start looking at are the risk factors that people have. And that's when we start talking about it, it's the most broad general term of what are we looking for? It's not necessarily that they're showing signs and symptoms, but a situation that could cause them to start having signs and symptoms. So risk factors can be as simple as they're off work for a while. Now they're away from their social support system. They're away from work. We don't know what their home life is like. They may have lost their identity to whatever they are, whether it be an officer, EMS, corrections, fire, whatever it may be. They're sitting at home. They're away from their norm. It could be things like divorce, money problems, a sick child at home. These are all things where you look at that situation and you go, wow, that's a lot for one person to really handle. Yeah. Maybe I should just keep an eye on this person. It potentially can go somewhere, but that's where I really want to sit and just keep an eye on them. Check in with them. How are you doing? With that, you also have to realize what that person has gone through in their life as well. Have they had traumas in their past? Because we all came into this job with some type of life prior to this. Did they find a family member who had committed suicide already? Did they have people who had mental illness in their family? Did they have a parent pass away due to cancer? Whatever it may be, they're bringing this stuff in as well, and that's what you really need to look at. You take a step further with first responders, and you know it, I know it, we've all been there. Keep an eye on the ones who are going through a bad streak. And when I say a bad streak, you know what I mean. A lot of deaths. And it doesn't matter what. It could be a lot of suicides. It could be a lot of codes. It could be a myriad of all those put together. But when you start looking at them and go, wow, that crew's had like 6 deaths in the past month. That's where we really need to start, like, hey, let's go check in on those guys. That's a lot.
Triggering events. Those are obvious triggering events. But
yes.
There's probably a spectrum when we go on, even close to death. I go to a lot of nursing homes, and I see a lot of people at the end of stages of life all the time, where sometimes I got to remind myself, like, yo, you can't have these separating thoughts when you're off duty so much to get away from the dying process that's in front of me all of the time.
Yes, and it's that simple. Or it could be as simple as that person's retiring.
Right.
For 30 years, they have been an officer. They have been a firefighter. They have been an EMS. They've been a corrections officer, a dispatcher. On Tuesday, that's what you're doing. On Thursday, you're John Q. Public. How tied is that person to the job that, okay, if this is their life, we should probably start having a conversation with this person. But that's where you start looking at those risk factors of, okay, could this potentially cause some issues going down the road? And you try to have those conversations like, hey, you just check in with them. Hey, what's going on? Hey, how you been? Hey, how's this? You really try to work that to where they know someone cares what they're going through. For all of us, it's a lot harder, I would say, probably in the patrol car or working EMS or corrections. We at the fire department have that built-in support system that we go to every day. For better or worse, you have that support circle where we all sit around the table, we all talk about everything. But if you're sitting in that car by yourself, you don't have anybody to talk to. When you start having those conversations, you really start talking to these people, that's where you start seeing these changes and getting to know the people that you work with. The next part about it is environmental. Do they have the means to do this stuff? Is this person a hunter and I know their house is full of guns? You start looking at those things.
The access to the quick and sufficient,
yes.
It's a lot harder to poison yourself. It's a lot harder to jump off something. There's a lot of questions there. But like you're saying, if you have a literal button you can pull,
yes,
makes it a little easier to make that decision.
Yes. And you look at these things and you get to know the people. I've worked with people that when they walk in the back door, I can tell you what kind of night they had at home just by the way they walk in the back door. But it maybe is something as simple as you got somebody who gets his money's worth at dinner. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? They're piling that plate on. They come to sit down to dinner, and they've got the little tiny plate with barely any food
push
on
it around a little bit.
Yeah, and you're like, what's going on here? You know what I mean?
Like, eat his third helping of ice cream.
Yes. So, I mean, it's those little changes that you want to start looking for. But the initial thing that you're really going to see are those risk factors. Okay, they're in a situation that would be tough for anybody. So you start looking at those. You start looking at those risk factors that are going on. The next part about it is they're not talking to anybody about it. It's weighing on them more. Now you start seeing the warning signs. Okay. So now we have the situation that could have caused it. Now it's causing the signs.
Because I've created the conditions for them to emerge.
Yes.
And that's what you're leading to. Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Like Dr. Ray was talking about, it's that change in personality. It's that change in whatever they're doing. The social butterfly who's setting up all the social events for the station, you call him up and go, hey, man, you want to go grab a burger and a beer? And he's like, nah, I'm just going to stay home. I'm hanging out. That's not like you.
Right.
You know, the increased use of drug and alcohol, big one. You got the guy who's drinking Shirley Temples at the bar normally. Next thing you know, he's coming in every 4-day talking about how he got blottoed the entire 4-day. You're like, whoa, what's going on here now? Sleeping too much or too little? Because like Dr. A was talking about, you get to that point, you're not sleeping, but you're tired all the time. So it'll be the person who'll go in their bunk, or you talk to him and go, hey, you want to go out? No, I'm going to go to bed. You're like, it's 7 o'clock at night. You're going to bed at 7 o'clock at night? Are you kidding me right now? You're the guy who I used to have to pull out of the bar at 2 a.m. So It's one of those things. So you start looking at these warning signs, and some of the later signs that you're really looking for: giving away prized possessions, getting their affairs in order, visiting people and calling and saying goodbye. I know you're listening to this going, well, I'm going to figure that one out.
Right.
I mean, that's pretty, like, I get it. But let me take you through a journey of how this can be missed, because a lot of these things singularly look like nothing. It's like putting a puzzle together. Apart, the pieces mean nothing. When you put the pieces together, the whole picture is shown. We'll go with the guy who breaks his leg. He's at work, breaks his leg. Long-term disability, he's off for a while. So he's sitting at home. He's away from his support system. He's away from the job that he loves. He's away from all the people that he hangs out with. Who knows what the home situation is like. And he's lost his identity as police officer, firefighter, EMS, whatever it may be. So then he starts having those signs and symptoms. We start getting away from going out with people. We start isolating a little more. You start getting angry at home. Now, when we talk about, does he have access to lethal means? What do you get when you break your leg?
Oh, you get all sorts of stuff. They make you sign off and say that I'm not going to get addicted to.
Yeah, a whole bunch of pain pills.
Right.
So now you got somebody who's at home, away from the support system, depressed, isolated, with pain medication. Do you see how apart these don't look like a lot? But when you put them together, the picture's starting to become very clear.
And it's very easy to not, quote, check in on somebody thoroughly while they're off during that circumstance. How many people have you worked with? Like, oh, Steve's off with the shoulder, Jill's off with the knee, Bill's off with the back. And you're just like, hey, text, you mess with them a little bit, but like, I don't know. They could be laid up on 7 Vicodin and a case of beer.
Right. You go back to like everyday normal stuff.
Like I'm moving on. I'm going to make fun of Mike walking through the back door with the dumb haircut he got.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Looks like I got hooked up with a weed whacker there. But like getting to those late signs, so now people go, oh, I'm going to understand when they give away their prized possessions, right? There's been situations through the peer support stuff where we've gone in after members committed suicide. Like one of these person was a big mountain biker, loved mountain biking, loved this mountain bike. Him and his buddy used to mountain bike all the time. And one day he shows up at his house. He's like, I think I'm going to get out of mountain biking. I think I'm going to do something different. You know, I know you like mountain biking. You want my mountain bike. Yeah, they're like a $5,000 mountain bike. You're going to give it to me for free. 2 weeks later, he completed suicide. On the surface, my buddy's just giving me a bike because he wants to try something different. But he had all of those risk factors, the warning signs. Now he's giving his bike away. You see how apart it doesn't look like much. But when you put it together, the picture is now a lot clearer. Getting their affairs in order, a lot of times you'll see it where they have sitting out on the table the bank statements, the passwords for everything, the keys for everything, the whatever it may be. They're setting themselves up because they don't want to hurt the person who's left behind. They look at it as an act of love that I'm going to make this as easy on you as possible. And like Dr. A was saying, they're not trying to end their life. They're trying to end the pain, the thoughts, whatever it may be that's causing them all this stuff. The last one that I'm going to talk about is the visiting or calling people and saying goodbye. You're sitting there going, well, I'm going to notice that from a mile away.
How do you not say I'm saying goodbye and not say like that was weird? Like, are they saying it in like a different way where like they're saying goodbye in their own way that you're not literally hearing goodbye?
Yes. Let me set you up with a situation. 2 people, they hang out all the time, and like life gets in the way. My buddies and I, we used to hang out all the time, but now it's, got to be scheduled 6 months in advance.
Dude,
and,
kids and jobs, you get it.
Gentleman showed up at his buddy's house like on a Tuesday night with a 6-pack of beer. He's like, hey, man, you want to do a bonfire and listen to some tunes and stuff? Yeah, sounds good. They went out, and they hadn't hung out in a while, and it was kind of a nice surprise. And a couple days later, he completed suicide. He was going to his buddies to say goodbye.
So when you say goodbye in that sense, you're really saying they're going through this process of their own goodbye.
Yes.
And they're not going to spell it out with a card and expect a cake and all that. This is not a recognition type situation, but this person is cathartically going through their own goodbye so that they can go check that off and kill themselves.
Absolutely.
When a person has gotten to the point where they have come to terms within their own mind that they are going to do this, so they're going to attempt to complete the action, then it's going to be presented in a way that it does not alarm the people they love the most. They're going to make sure that those people are protected. But they're also going to make sure that they have the opportunity to say, in their own time and in their own space, their own goodbyes, because that's the control. This whole entire process, they can control it.
I see. They're justifying the goodbye.
Yes.
They're creating that.
They're creating that space.
Yes.
The narrative's there, they're
Yeah.
pushing away the help or avoiding it.
And often in their minds, it makes sense that they're making it easier for people. Well, at least
Right.
this person has, an opportunity to talk to me or have this last time with me.
The other part, we always talk about that change in personality. You have the person who like I said, has had this risk factor going on, whatever it may be. They've been showing these signs and symptoms that they're different than they normally are. Usually they're not acting quote unquote normal, but normal for themselves. And then all of a sudden they're laughing, they're joking, they're having a good time, and then they complete suicide. And that's what really I think messes a lot of people up is, well, I just saw him. He was laughing. He was joking. We were making plans for this, that, and the other. And blah. They were like that because they made their decision. Mm-hmm. They were at peace with their decision. That pain that they had been going through for so many weeks, months, years, whatever it may be, they knew that it was coming to an end. And that's where that change comes from. So as much as people go, oh, man, I thought he's doing better. It's actually, if they're in that bad state of mind, and then all of a sudden it's almost like euphoric, that's a huge sign and symptom that you need to be looking at where you're like, okay, what's going on here?
Is it because it's almost of the sense of relief that they figured out, well, I got an answer?
They've got an answer, but they've got control back. They're not going to have that pain anymore.
Yeah.
I've been carrying that pain for so long. I figured out how I'm going to get rid of that pain.
And they're not stopping to realize that it's your thoughts that's making you feel better is the same as the thoughts that are making you feel poorly, right?
Yes.
That it's the thoughts.
That's
and that it's
interesting.
fleeting, right? That
Right.
you can work through this. Like one moment you're feeling like this, and if you've gotten to the point where you can, in this next 2 weeks, and you're feeling like euphoric and things are great, you've created that dynamic in your mind. You've created that thought process. You've created that change. And so it's just the space that once you're clinically in a space where you're trying to get help, that's what we're working on, the cognition around it, the cognitive thoughts that are around why you feel this is the only path out of it, right?
So when you say finally willing to get help, we say that we're like, hey, let's take you in and get some help. I've been on scene with I don't know how many people that when you ask them, do you want to commit suicide? They say yes, and or they tried, and now I'm here. When we say we're going to take you to get help, I literally mean I'm taking you to the hospital. But can you give more detail to that and more granularity? What does help look like? What are the treatment options for people with suicidal thoughts and or ideation?
Just like we've said before, that it's going to be a personal journey. But the process for acute, so in the moment, suicidal ideations, like you've caught someone attempting to do something and then you're taking them to the hospital. That is something immediate. That's a more immediate. We want to get you into a space where we can get you calm, defused enough to where we can just get you through that moment, right? So that's a momentary space. But there's a long pattern of everything that has happened leading up to that, right?
We don't want the person, so there's two people, somebody who's almost falling down the well, and then somebody who can't even see the well. And
Exactly.
we don't even want you on the path to the well. So it's almost like the sooner you get them away from that path, the better. And what you're saying is if you're too close to the problem, we got to take some immediate actions, kind of take care of you completely
yes.
for maybe a couple days, if not longer, identify a situation and get you resettled back down and then get you away from the path just back where those other people are, which is going to be different because they didn't have the intervention or prevention early enough.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a space in getting to there. And especially with first responders, it's difficult because you're not going to have someone come to you and say, there's some people that will come because mental health is becoming a little bit more of a trendy topic, right?
Sure.
Mental and behavioral health becoming a little bit more of a trendy topic.
It's a safe word now.
It's a safe word. And then we have this younger generation who is not afraid. They are literally not afraid of most things. So they will talk about it. They'll open up and they'll be in the space. As a clinician, I may have someone come in and says, I have these thoughts and it scares me. I have yet to have a first responder that has come in and saying, I want to end it, or I have these thoughts of ending it because things are so hard because of their fear of the stigma that's attached to it. And then also their fear of looking or feeling weak, right? Then the treatment becomes different. It becomes of me having to take the extra steps of getting to know the person and then also going through my clinical checklist of different risk factors, right? So what's the person's history with mental health concerns? Is there a history of depression, anxiety, PTSD? Is there cumulative stress? What's the home life like? What's childhood like? All of these things play a factor in your ability to have this motivation, a stronger motivation of being able to think about or plan an act of suicide. Another factor is the intent to die. Like, how strong of this will do you have this will? Dr. Amisadri mentioned it earlier, speaking about this strong feeling of this is the only way out. There's nothing else that can help me. There's nothing else that can help us. And as clinicians, sometimes that's the thing that we see, that our goal then at that point is to try our best to help you be in treatment long enough to be able to make a different decision. Because there's things that we won't be able to do that will be able to change it. The other thing is previous suicide attempts. Has this happened before? I don't know if you guys have had a chance to listen to the webinar that we did with Kevin Berthia and Kevin Briggs, where he talked about he had these thoughts for a long time, and he had some other attempts, which were cries out for help, that people really didn't know what it was. So once he's seen his out of being able to finally do it and do it in a space where it could happen and it would be final, he took it. He attempted to go in that space. So you'll want to look through things like that. Access to firearms. The leading cause in first responders are using an actual firearm, suicide by pills or overdosing, and then also pesticides. We don't even think about that. Natural household cleaners, things that we have in the house, bleach, things like that.
Yeah, chemical suicide's becoming a thing where
it's becoming a
teams
huge
are actually
thing.
training on it.
Yeah, it's a huge thing. It's a huge thing. And then often it's easier for families. It's less messy. Your kids can come in and just think that you're sleeping, until it recently became more of a situation. If it's just natural causes, most people won't even do toxicology reports. So it's one of these different things that it's thinking through this process and how it looks for you. And then last but not least, one of the things that we have to assess for is domestic situations. Is this a space in which you feel that you have to be in control of someone else? You have to be in control of your partner. You have to be in control of this other person. And the only way for you to control the two of you is to end it for both of you. And that is another common factor of suicide that happens for first responders, because the increased relationship conflict that happens with these high intense cumulative.
Yeah, you're not exactly,
jobs.
soft and cuddly during those thoughts, so it's creating a friction between you and your mate.
It's creating friction between you and your mate. People don't seem to understand you. This person confessed to love you in such a way, and then now they don't understand you. Often that can create thoughts that are confusing.
Okay, Manisha, like what you described there is like all the things that need to be assessed so that they can identify what the best treatment option is for that person, because it's going to be different intensities of what those people are suffering from depending on the situation to situation, person to person, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the outpatient treatment methods are a little less invasive in terms of the fact that they're not medications that you'll be taking, or they're not forcing you to be in a hospital setting or anything like that. However, they're powerful. They're super intense. EMDR, neurofeedbacks, which is the brain scanning, the TMRS treatments. These are all treatments that are intense. They are created for individuals who have resistance to normal therapeutic processes like talk therapy or just cognitive behavioral therapy or processing therapy. Those things can be coupled with another treatment, but when you have people who work in these high stress environments, occupationally, they find themselves being able to compartmentalize, isolate, disassociate very easily. Often they need to have something that's a little bit more intense. And it's no joke. I think that people are a little afraid of some of the new things, but it works, right? Just like Mike was saying earlier.
Oh, 100%. You and I have talked. I've tried the EMDR and the brain mapping or brain spotting. It's 45 minutes, and I was so exhausted by the end of it, I went home and slept for 2 hours. It's intense, but it works. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest thing. It's more of a newer option that is out there for treatment, but just realize that they are more intense. Just because it's 45 minutes and you're sitting there and you're looking at a light going back and forth, you think, okay, well, this isn't going to be anything.
Well, I think the biggest point is just saying there's an efficacy and evidence that these things do work, and there are options. So we say we're going to take people to get help. When they're immediately suicidal, we certainly are going to want to offer them those treatments to kind of get them back, but then to solve the problems later on, or those people that are having less intensities of that at that time, they're going to have to really face some stuff. And that's where it may be less physically demanding, like you don't have to be restrained because you're fighting it literally, or drugged, but no longer having the opportunity to avoid it and having to face something is going to be very difficult.
Absolutely.
But it's good that those treatment options are there, which is really good, because that allows you to have the conversation with somebody who might actually be suicidal. You know what I mean? So, Mike, we know what suicidal ideation is. We know what suicidal thoughts are. We understand that treatments are available. We know that there's a spectrum of them. We know that everybody needs a custom and catered treatment to it. But more importantly, we can get help. There are treatments available, and suicidal ideation is fleeting. It's not something usually you're going to have all the time. But the most important thing is recognizing it and knowing when to step in. Here's the hard part. What's that conversation look like? Because here's what I do. Hey, Mike, you should go talk to him.
Oh, right? Absolutely. That's usually how
You're
it
the
is.
guy. You go talk to him.
Yes. And that's the thing is, no matter what, it's not a easy conversation to have.
Right.
No matter what you cut it. Manisha's done it way more than I have, and it's never an easy conversation to ever have. The biggest thing is you see these things, you see those risk factors, you see those signs and symptoms, and you know something's not right. A lot of times people are afraid, well, if I go talk to that person, they're going to commit suicide because I talked to them about it. Or because I brought up suicide, that just put the thought in their head. Manisha, correct me if I'm wrong here. You're the expert. That thought was in their head way before you had that conversation with them. Mm-hmm. That thought of suicide, that plan of suicide was there way before you're having this conversation. Nothing you say is going to force them over the edge of this suicide.
Or create shock, like
yes.
Like it's such a common thought to where they're not even going to pretend to be surprised, maybe.
Yes. And a lot of times they want to talk about it.
Right.
They just don't know how to talk about it, or they don't know how to start that conversation to talk about it. So one of the first things, you go up and you just talk to them. And if you have that personal relationship prior, it's a lot easier than if you don't know the person, because they don't trust you from anybody. At least if you and I work together, we trust each other. It's as simple as pulling them out in the bay or maybe in the locker room. Like, hey, you know what? I'm starting to see these things. I know you got a lot going on at home. I know you got this going on. Or maybe, hey, I know you've been on a bad streak at work here. I just want to check in. I've noticed these things. And tell them what you've noticed. Yeah. Normally, you're a social person and you haven't come out in 6 months. I've noticed this. I've noticed this. I've noticed this. And you start having that conversation. If you don't know the person, it's a lot harder, because now you have to gain that trust of that person that you're talking to. So you start talking to them and you start learning about them. You don't come right off the gate and come out and go, hey, what's your name? Oh, is your name Geoff? Hey, do you want to commit suicide? Because they're not going to say anything to you. You know what I mean? Have that conversation with them a little bit. Gain some trust. Let them know that you're there for the right reasons. I want to know about you. I care enough that I want to learn about you and learn about what you have going on. Don't be surprised if they're going to be defensive right at first. Don't be surprised if they're going to get angry at you. They're going to get mad. They're going to call you every name in the book. You're starting to get to where something they don't want to talk about. It's a defense mechanism.
Right.
You know, tell them, hey, I've seen these things. I've noticed these things. It concerns me. Now, when you go to actually do this, there's also some things you don't want to say. And Manisha, add to this list, but these are some of the big ones.
Yeah.
The first one you hear, hey, man, you should just calm down. Okay. I also like to say this list is what not to say in a marriage as well. Marriage and talking to someone who's suicidal.
Yeah.
No one in the history of the world has calmed down when you told them to calm down.
Right.
Right.
You know what I mean? So let's start there. The next one you might want to stay away from is, you know what you should have done? They already feel terrible. You don't need to tell them what they should have done. I think they know what they probably should have done. Like talking to someone who's suicidal or in marriage, usually after you go, you know what you should have done, that usually then is followed up back to number one with, whoa, you should calm down. Yeah. You know what I mean? like, whoa, okay. Next biggest ones, and it's easy to do. I understand what you're going through.
Right. You're trying to tell me you know what this feels like?
We're
here talking about
yes.
this, right? And sometimes they might. There are certain people who are the right ambassador for that.
Yes, but there's one person who knows what you're going through.
That's right.
And that's you.
Yeah.
As firefighters, as first responders, we can have a conversation to go, that was a bad extrication. We don't need to talk about what a bad extrication was. We've been there. I wasn't on your extrication, but I know what a bad extrication is. So you don't really need to say, I understand what you're going through, but you can frame it with, hey, I don't understand what you're going through, but I've been in a similar situation. You know, we have that commonality there.
Right. You're not trying to say, I get it. You're trying to say is maybe we have a similar situation. You're lending it. You're offering rather than saying.
Yes.
And I think that's a lot easier subconsciously to like let you in while I'm having this moment.
Absolutely. Because I can't understand 100%. Right? I don't walk in your shoes. I never will understand. I'm going to try to, but I never will.
And even if you don't have a situation that's similar, just empathize with it.
Yes.
Man, that must be. Give
Right.
them their full attention. Give them your full attention at the time. Is I hear you, and you're right to be feeling the way that you are, because I can't imagine, right?
Yep.
And so that also helps. It normalizes that this is a human feeling.
Yes.
Right?
And one of the tough ones is things will get better.
Yeah.
I can't guarantee you things will get better. What I can help you with is give you the opportunity to make things better. That's a better way of saying that. Everybody wants to go, hey, we're going to make this better. I can't guarantee that. But I can guarantee you I'm going to give you the opportunity.
Get
to
you on
make
that
it better.
path.
Yes. And then the last one, and it's really hard to do because you're truly asking, but why are you doing this? That sounds very judgmental.
Right.
What I'm asking
like,
you-
well, just tell me why. and
Yeah,
we'll talk
why are
about
you doing
that.
this? You know what I mean? Type deal.
What's your root problem?
Yes. It's a lot easier to go, tell me what brought us here. Tell me about you. Tell me about your situation. Tell me what brought us here.
Yeah.
And you have those conversations, and that conversation will progress. Realize this isn't a conversation that's going to happen in 10 minutes. Generally speaking, you're learning about this person. You're gaining their trust. You legitimately want to know what's going on with them. And that takes time. Unless you have that deep personal connection prior to that, you're going to have to put some time in. When you talk to people in this kind of situation, you legitimately do want to understand where they're coming from. Once that starts going on, the next fear is no one ever wants to say suicide. It's the word that everybody's afraid of.
Right, because it automatically bought me a ticket to go down this algorithm.
Yes.
And I might not like that because I'm no longer in control.
Yes. But that's one of the most important things you need to realize is when you're having this conversation. I've even caught myself at work doing it. We do it all the time. Were you thinking of hurting yourself?
Man, they make you ask it like on every patient now. It's like
Yes.
part of our thing. And I get it. Trust me when I say I completely understand and validate that we should be checking on human beings to make sure they're in the right situation. But it's almost so much it's contrived.
Yes, but when I ask you, are you going to hurt yourself? If your plan right now is to go and get a shotgun and use it, are you planning on hurting yourself or are you planning on killing yourself?
That's a different story.
So you use suicide specifically. Are you thinking of completing suicide? Use the word suicide.
Use the word.
It's not going to push them over the edge. It's not going to make them do it. Like I said, it's not.
Just don't beat around the bush.
Don't
You
beat
have to be
around the
literal.
bush. Go right at it.
Right. And you're not talking about intensity. You're
No.
saying literal intensive. Are you going to commit suicide? Let's just be straight up.
Yes. And what the next part that everybody's afraid of is them saying yes.
And when you say afraid, you mean for the person asking the question.
Yes.
Because then you got to do something.
Yes.
Now you're pot committed.
Yes. Now you're committed, right? But and everybody,
Right.
and that's why a lot of people don't have that
Don't ask
conversation,
it. Yeah.
is because they're scared of them
Right.
saying yes.
Right.
You may have saw it coming from a mile away, but you don't know necessarily what to do, so you're going to avoid asking the question. When that comes and they say yes, be very open with it, non-judgmental, and ask them, do you have a plan? They'll explain to you what their plan is.
Now, why just draw that out? Is the thought of talking about it going to create the dialogue needed for them to maybe exercise the thought of it without actually doing it? Or like, what's the thought of asking that question?
So bringing it out is important in that space because, one, if they actually are admitting to having the problem, they've been wanting to tell someone. They've been wanting to release it, right? So the more that you can help it come from this big, huge thing to something a little bit smaller, a little bit more manageable, I think the better it will be for the person that you're talking to. But it also goes back to saying the word, right? If it is something that they want to do, they're going to not let you get to the point where you're even asking the words, or they're going to be just as straightforward as you when you ask it to say, no, I'm good, right? Those situations may happen, but we're hoping that you get that person who's like, I've been dying to talk to someone about this. You've noticed these changes. You've noticed the warning signs. You've noticed like the symptoms, the things that have changed it. And I have been wanting to talk to somebody about this. And they start to do that.
So how often do you think, in like your opinion or experience, or maybe there's some actual data on this, but how often is it where if you were to ask that question, the person is going to be straight up and honest with you with the yes? How many people are going to be open and honest with you, those, do you think? Half?
Honestly,
We really don't know.
It's hard to tell.
it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell because it's so individualized.
And it's so-
such an
that's what makes it almost
individualized
dangerous,
process.
right?
That's what makes it different, and that's
Okay.
what makes it dangerous. It's one of those situations where you can't really put a number on it, and I would even say it's a less of a number that we would put on it for first responders, because suicidal has these process of thoughts where you can go in and out of it. You can be talking to someone who's suicidal who's not suicidal in the moment, and in those moments, you're going to get all of those no's. I'm good. Nope. had it, maybe I thought about it before, but right now I'm good. Nope, I don't have a plan. All right. So it's as simple as that in the space. If someone wants to talk about it, they will talk about it with you.
They want to talk about it. So let them talk. The other fear is everybody is afraid of, well, I don't know what to say to them. I'm not really sure what to say. And that's another reason why they avoid the conversation. If you talk to a lot of people who have attempted suicide, was talking to someone and came back over the rail or stopped themselves from it, the thing that they'll tell you is it was not what that person said. It's the fact that they listened to what I had to say. Yes, you're having that conversation, you're talking to that person, but a lot of it is just listening to what that person has to say and trying to understand what they're going through. Kevin Briggs, I 100% stole this from him, but it's 100% true. When you're talking to people who are suicidal, mental crisis, whatever it may be, as human beings, we listen to respond. As you're talking to me, I'm formulating what I'm going to say and to reply to you. When it comes to this stuff, you listen to understand. I'm not listening to reply. I'm listening to understand what you're going through. And that's the big difference is a lot of this isn't necessarily what you say. It's the fact that you're sitting down and listening to them. And that's what you have to realize when you're having these conversations. You're not there to fix their problem. In a clinician sense, that's a little different. But as a peer talking to a peer, you're there to make them feel like you care and that you want to listen to what they have to go through. As a peer person, I'm not fixing what their problem is, but I'm letting them know they're not the only one there. They're not alone. They're not the one who's got to deal with this themselves, which kind of brings us to our next point of once you have them and you talk about it and you have the conversation and they'll tell you, what are you going through? I got this, this, and this. Well, what's your plan? I plan on doing this. I plan on doing this. Okay. Well, let's go get you to talk to somebody. It's a scary conversation to have also because you may not know where to turn to. Now, you've got the person, they want to go get help, and you're like, oh, man, I have no idea where to take this person. That's where Frontline Strong comes in. We've got the website, but more importantly, we have the phone number that you can call, and they can talk to somebody, and they can help you get those crisis services. They can help you to get to clinicians. They can help you get those crisis services. So now that takes away the barrier of having that conversation because in your pocket, you have a phone number. And here's the important thing. Make them make the phone call because they're making that decision to take their life back. Do not make the phone call for them. Here's the phone number I need you to call. Because when they look back, they took control in that moment. They found something to help them. And that's where you're helping that person and you don't even know it yet. Just by making them make the phone call. And let them know, hey, listen, I'm locked in with you now. You told me you're suicidal. I can't leave you until I get you somewhere that we need to get help. Right now, if I need to drive you to go somewhere, I'm going to drive you. Whatever this path looks like, you and I are locked in it together. I'm not leaving you till I know you're taken care of. If one of us fell through a hole at work, at a fire, or officer got shot, whatever it may be, we're not leaving that person behind until we get them help. And it's no different than that. Once they're in there and you know they're suicidal, they have told you, you got a plan. Listen, let's go do this together. I'm with you. I'm not leaving you until you get help. And that's one of the biggest things is finding those things. And luckily, we have Frontline Strong now that you can call 24/7 and you can get those services. I don't care if it's 2 o'clock in the morning. We can pick up the phone. Here's the phone number. I need you to call this phone number. We can get you somewhere.
Help is only a phone call away. Call or text the National Suicide Hotline at 988 if you or someone you know are having thoughts of suicide. In addition, Michigan Frontline workers and their families have access to the Frontline Strong Together 5 program. FST5 provides streamlined access to behavioral health resources, as well as increased access to crisis services to Michigan's Frontline 5, which includes all professional, part-time, and volunteer, firefighters, EMS, law enforcement, corrections officers, and 911 dispatchers. FST5 was collaboratively created by first responders and mental health experts to provide 24/7 live support, effective resources, and cutting-edge services to prevent and alleviate PTSD, anxiety, depression, and even suicide. If you are experiencing any crisis, work-related, substance abuse, depression, relationships, financial, or any other, reach out by calling 1-833-34-STRONG or go to fst5.org for more information. Thank you, Dr. Ray and Manisha, for joining us on the Minds on the Frontline podcast. Each of you continue to bring tremendous value to the show, and we hope to have you back soon. I hope everybody enjoyed this episode. We have more great content coming out soon. Thank you for listening to the Minds on the Frontline podcast. Have a great day.